welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we're going to be talking about the groppo or gropi, or sometimes you'll hear people say groppos. Different ways of kind of doing it plural. I tend to prefer saying gropi with the sort of Italian plural. This is essentially a cadential figure that you've probably heard already if you're doing lots of listening. We had some examples of it in our pavan from Dalza. And basically what it is, it's just this little figure. If I were to play your standard cadence and I were to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and then I were to add the gropi, it's just this little turn. So we go C, B, C, B, A, B, C. So 1 and 2 and then 1, 2. And I'll add that in context. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 and 2 and then 1, 2. And you know, most of the time this is very natural and not too hard to play. You run into them all the time. I think the only thing to consider is when do we keep the tempo basically the same, and then when do we slow down. I think it's going to be situational, but most of the time what we're going to do is keep the tempo pretty close to the same, especially in faster pieces, to sort of keep the motion going. Dances, this can be really important, and then saving that rallentando or ritardando for the end of a big section or the end of a piece. So when you get to the end of the piece, you can do something like this. Play off of it a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do that. Of course, you could have a really energetic piece and you're just going. And maybe you want to end it that way. One thing that happens is as students are playing their pieces, they'll begin to run into these gropi where the alternation double speeds. So you'll be going along in 16th notes, or maybe they're written as 30-second notes, and then suddenly, boom, there'll be 30-second notes or 64th notes or whatever in there, and it's terrifying. You're going, I've got a little example here that I pulled up from a Dowland fantasy. You're going along and you've got these 16th notes. Oh my gosh, that's double speed. How do I deal with that? It's absolutely terrifying. And you know, there are players that can do it. You know, Paul Odette, my forward, he was like, but I think sometimes if you try to do it exactly in time and play those double speeds, it ends up having this sort of mechanical characteristic to it. And there's some evidence to indicate that actually when we see those double-speeded gropi, it's actually an indication to slow down. There's this fascinating quote from Frescobaldi from 1615, and he says, "The cadences, although they may be written quickly, are properly to be very much drawn out, and in approaching the end of passages or cadences, one proceeds by drawing out the time more adagio." So it's interesting, in the 16th century, you will not see the word rallentando, you will not see the word ritardando, but you do see in the middle of, say, a dance or a piece where 16th notes are the prevalent fast rhythm. So I'm going along in my fantasy here, and I've got, these are my fast notes. And then suddenly I have these double-speeded notes, that it's actually an invitation to slow down. And I think there are lots of different ways you could do it, and we could experiment with this passage. You could begin the slowdown right on the downbeat of that measure, or you could begin it on the dissonance that arrives on beat 2. Let's see what those sound like. So let's say I put it on the downbeat. And then I speed up into the passage that comes after. And I may not speed up as much if that were the true ending. For example, if I were to do something like... But because this piece continues, and in fact it goes into kind of an energetic section, what I'm doing here is I'm playing with this, sort of popping myself into time. Now the other option is to delay that adagio to right to that dissonant moment, that G over the D. We'll try that out. probably what I would do is I would hit stop on this recording and listen back and see if I liked either of those, or maybe try some other options. Maybe I slow down a little bit in the measure before. I don't know if I like that as much, but again, you experiment with it, and I think you're going to run into these all the way back to the beginning of the 16th century, and I do think that in a time when they weren't using terms like rallentando and retardando, these doubled sort of cadential figures where the gropi are doubled, and it almost seems like, oh my gosh, how could I fit in? How am I ever going to be that fast? And you realize maybe that's actually an indication that you need to slow down. That here they're making it impossible to play so that it forces you to breathe and add that rallentando in there. And I think you can make great musical sense of that, and it ends up making it easier to play, and I think it's more satisfying to listen to than just working really hard and doubling that speed. There are maybe some exceptions, like for example, if you see these doubled gropi in the middle of a phrase instead of a cadence, it may be that you're just stretching time there a little bit, or you need to work a little more to get the speed up. So certainly there are exceptions to this, but it's something that I want you to think about, because most of the time it's a big cadence, the end of a section in a dance, the end of a big section in a fantasy or something like that, and suddenly you have these double speeded notes. So the two things to take away from this lesson are just an understanding of the ornament itself, not really an ornament, the embellishment, the gropi being this little rotation at cadences, which is not really a trill. It is not one pluck with an alternation with the fingers. It is its own beast that comes from plectrum playing, and we do want to pluck and articulate all of these notes. There is like one viol source, I think, in the 16th century that says if it's just too fast for you, you can slur it. But that's a viol source. I don't know of a lute source that says that. And I think that sort of thing would be more appropriate for those turns in the middle of a phrase. But when we get to the end of a cadence and you're looking at it and you're going, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm ever going to play that fast enough. It's just terrifying. Instead, think of it, oh, it's stretching time. And then you can pop forward in that way. So don't be terrified when you see these things. Explore the possibility that they're actually an indication to slow down. And I do think that you sort of see them in phases, and different composers really enjoy using them, and some don't as much. I think Richard Allison, I don't know. I can't think of a piece of his where he actually has one of these double speed gropi cadences, but you'll run into John Dolan in Variety of Lute Lessons, for example, in the King of Denmark Galliard. Even though in the manuscripts you don't have them, suddenly they're popping up, and you're going, oh, this might be a sort of a invitation to stretch this moment out a little bit more, to give yourself some more time. So think of using the music and the moment, the interesting moment, to actually make it technically easier for yourself, instead of just thinking, oh God, I have to double the speed. I think we'll all be happier if you do that. And of course, you're always welcome to disagree and go against the grain and just double that speed, and I will be very impressed, and I'll be like, you do that. I am not going to do that. I think it's hard enough to play the lute. So put in your comments, your questions. That source for if you guys want to look it up, it's the Frescobaldi Toccate, is published in 1615, 1616. Obviously originally in Italian. I gave you an English translation, but a very, very interesting little quote about what to do when you see all of those notes and just crammed into a single measure. And I think it's quite a refreshing thing to hear and to work with when you're playing. Any questions or comments, throw them in there. If you're enjoying the channel so far and you'd like to support it, easiest way to do that is to subscribe. I will also put my Patreon link in the description if you'd like to support in that way. Happy looting, happy practicing, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.